Hello, it's Peter Merrick, and I am excited today because we get to speak with Melissa Wilson, and she had an incredible positive impact on my thinking in the early 2000s. Her book came out, Networlding, on July 4th. Oh, that's what it reads, 2000. I discovered it a year later. And I read it and I digested it, and it became part of me, and we'll be talking about that, so I don't want to steal from that. About 10 years later, I reached out to Melissa, and not only was she someone who actually wrote how to build your network, she's open to building her network. So my attraction towards Melissa is she's not an academic who's just gone out there and told you how to do it. She's actually done it and continues to do it. So Melissa, I'd like to welcome you and thank you. And we've known each other for probably about 12 years now, 11, 12 years, the first time we connected. And this is the first time you and I have actually seen each other.
Yes, yes. Well, now the world is very much more open, and people are able to connect in visibly even more, and hopefully personally even more as the years go on.
Well, I love your city. I love Chicago.
Thank you.
How long have you lived in Chicago?
Oh gosh, it's been over 20 years, and sweet home Chicago. So love it.
Where are you originally from?
Originally from Ohio, and born in Cleveland, grew up in the middle between Cleveland and Columbus, which is Ashland, Ohio. Yeah. So I've had big city, small city town with a college there, but lots of opportunity to live a more pastoral life there. I had friends who were in 4-H and had horses, and so it's been nice to have a variety throughout my life.
Well, that's great, because I guess you weren't far from me, because I grew up in Toronto, and I'm proudly wearing my Toronto Blue Jays.
That's awesome. I'm such a Canada fan, and for whatever reason, I have a bunch of clients from Canada now, and they are just the finest people. So love Canada.
And Canadians are over designated. Can't walk around without having designations. Education is something sort of like the meme that's taken off in Canada in the last 50 years.
Yes, yes.
So I'd like to
go there, by the way. I love Montreal, and we go there, almost every 4 or 5 years. And the people there, I just found walking around, they espouse everything that I espouse in networlding. Building mutually beneficial relationships to create transformational opportunities.
Well, just to share with you, the reason my connection to Chicago is because the architecture in Toronto is very similar to Chicago. And growing up, because Toronto's gone through a major transformation, I don't even recognize it anymore. Chicago looked very similar to Toronto, and out of all the cities in the US, it was the most similar to Toronto. I chose myself that I had 50 winters, and it was enough, or maybe not that many, but yeah, I love the fact that I don't have to dress up and go and start my car and remove snow, and then have to deal with humidity in the summer. It's almost like a flip from really cold, and that's Chicago. And I said I needed a difference.
So I agree. Yes.
So Melissa, what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus first on the genesis of your first book, Networlding, and you have a beautiful copy of it.
This was my 7th book.
Oh, your 7th book. I'm so.
Yeah. That's okay.
Well, we're going to talk about your publishing company.
Yes.
So your 7th. Yeah. So what is the genesis of that book? Because a lot of ideas came together, and it was 22 years ago that book came out.
Yes, yes, which is which is really amazing. So I had been helping other people learn networking. That was my second book. The first one was a resource book for entrepreneurs for Chicago. And that created an incredible networking experience because no one had focused on a local book for starting a business in a city. And by the way, no one's ever done it in all the cities yet, which is still an opportunity. Wink, wink. So it's something, that should be done. But that got me connected to banks and accounting firms and law firms. And I just kept practicing the whole process that I created, which had 6 steps. And it was called, that one was called Make Your Connections Count.
Yeah.
And the concept was mega networking that I deployed. But I'm all about partnerships. And what I say in a network, to give a really strong tip around networks, is it's first one-to-one. You have the greatest strength of an exchange, which Networlding has that. Step 4 in Networlding is what I call the Great Exchange. And by the way, for anyone who emails me, I give my Great Exchange book, which is Networlding, and the 7 steps away. It's a fillable guidebook. So I'm happy to give a fillable PDF or an ebook to anyone because this is my give back time.
So you'll be able to contact Melissa, and she's wonderful. She gets back and she's all about growing networks. So I just want to focus on something that you said, because there was something that you mentioned that attracted me to your book.
Yes.
I entered the financial field back in 1991. I was on the verge of following your path and becoming a lawyer, and then it was the recession of 1991. And I started working at a brokerage firm. And in Canada, unlike the United States where you can just write the bar, in Canada, you need to find someone who can hire you for a year to apprentice before you could write the bar.
Oh,
and
nice.
none of my friends, and it's an undergrad degree, so you can start it after your third year.
Oh, nice.
A lot of my friends who, I'm going to use a Canadian word, I'm going to explain it, and I learned living in the States, Americans don't know this word, were keeners. And what that is they were really diligent and they got into law school after the second year. Me, I was not that focused. I was going after my 4th. And they could not. So when I was going to start law school, they were looking for articling jobs. And they were having issues finding it because it was the Great Recession of 1991, which was very difficult because Generation Xers know what a depression in the marketplace looks like, because the baby boomers were there and they weren't leaving. And I went into the financial industry because I realized, like, why was I going to go back to school if I could never get a job? Because I didn't know what the future held. And a few years passed and someone invited me to a networking group, and I went, and I found that I had no real connection with the people that other people had invited. And at that point I said, there's something wrong, doesn't connect with me. And I'm an avid reader, so I looked for tons of books on networking and how to grow it. And I was frustrated because no one ever teaches this, because it's something that you have to live, and it's also to become conscious of it. And one of the things that I found very frustrating, and this is where my attraction towards you was, I didn't read anybody who had actually lived it and then actually applied it. And I needed that. For me, I was out in the world. I wasn't an academic. I was reading this stuff because I wanted to make a living and build a life for myself. Like that's the reason why I was doing it.
Right. Yes.
And the 3 books that changed my way of thinking were your book, Networlding, Emmanuel Rosen's Anatomy of Buzz,
Yes.
And his story, I'm going to be speaking to him in the next month, but his story was similar to yours, where he had an experience and he wanted to understand that experience. He wanted to become conscious, because most of what we do is unconscious. And how can we improve if we don't become conscious of what we're doing?
Yes.
And the third book was Al Reese, Positioning.
Trout, yeah, Al Reese and Jack Trout, the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing.
Yes, that was huge, about contracting the brand, having a strong message, and being a lighthouse. I asked myself a serious question. We said, how do I light up a network? And I realized human beings are storytellers. So I wrote what I knew into a story, hopefully, like hoping that would be like a contagion, and it would light up a system, because people have to actually, to really work their network, they have to have a story, and they have to contract the brand, meaning their story has to be concise. So when I think of you, Melissa, I think of networking and networlding, and having deeper connections and expanding your network and helping people get their message out, because you're also a really successful, not just a writer, but a publisher. So I want to go back to the genesis of networlding, because the book had a profound impact on me. Questions that someone should ask when they're thinking, do I invest that one-on-one time? Everyone has potential. Certain people are more suited for you, where you can serve them and they can also help you.
Right. And that's the exchange. I like to say, just as trees give us oxygen. Thank you, trees. They're one of my favorite things in the whole world. I can see trees behind you. We get oxygen from them. We give them carbon dioxide. We breathe in, we breathe out. There is an exchange in life, and that is the center point. I believe that my duty and passion and path and why I'm here on this earth is to teach the great exchange. And so, to your point, I really appreciate that consciousness. And before this interview, we've caught up again, and we catch up pretty regularly, which is great. I love the idea of the consciousness of it, because you can't leverage unless it's something out there. I used to give talks at the University of Chicago. I was on the Women's Graduate Advisory Board for 7 years, and they needed a lot of help with networking every year. And they, believe it or not, they were more left brain dominant. They had trouble making connections. And I like what you said about observation. It's when I started with the Chicago Entrepreneur Source Book as book number 1, with Dearborn Publishing, that later became Kaplan, a training institute. Really appreciated them, and they were very much supported my idea of becoming a practitioner. You and I talked about this power of being a practitioner and going out and observing, analyzing. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a scientist. Everything you think of about a scientist, with the chemistry lab and so forth. I had gotten a chemistry lab one year for my 10th birthday, but I became eventually a social scientist like Malcolm Gladwell. In fact, I was working with Fast Company and doing talks, and it was wonderful, because Gladwell, everybody in that book, everybody still knows about the tipping point. And Gladwell's first article that he wrote as a science writer for the Washington Post was here in Chicago, with Lois Weisberg.
Yes.
And it was called 6 Degrees of Lois Weisberg. And I had the rare opportunity of sitting, you know, if I showed you where I'm at now, which I will.
Yes,
I'll
please.
show you. See, that's down there, down that way. There's my little dog. This is my podcast studio here. Down that way, my husband and I ended up moving to the city, and my window where I worked overlooked Lois Weisberg's office. She was in the cultural center. And so I am such a fan of Gladwell. I gave a lot of talks and many, many years at the University of Chicago about networking. And it just touched my heart that people appreciated the insights that I had. So one thing that you were talking about with networking or networlding is different to me and hopefully
Can
to
you
the
make the
world.
distinction for
Yes.
us?
Yeah, because so I'm giving a talk at Fortune Brands. I'm one of 3 on a panel. And actually Sally Helgeson, who's an adjunct professor at Harvard, she wrote Thriving 24/7 in the Female Advantage. And she was asking about networking, and I shared step 4 of networlding, which is the Great Exchange. And there are 7 levels of support in that, where you start with information, and in each step, I offer ways to ask for support and ways to give support. So the exchange is happening. So there's this mutually beneficial exchange. And it goes up from emotional support to information, to knowledge, which is information and experience, because experience would be like your stories, where you're sharing much more richly because people can put themselves in your story, or they know someone that they could reference. It moves on up to promotional support. And so many people, I love this line, that so many people are observers, but they have trouble with creating and imagining. So in the book, which is free, like I said, The Great Exchange, now I like to call it that because that's the core of it. And Sally Helgeson called it the holy grail for building relationships. I mean, an adjunct professor at Harvard saying that touched my heart. You move on up through promotional support, it helps you become more aware of, oh, how can I support Peter? What can I say? What can I do? So specific examples. And then once you get a starter, you know, it's like a starter yeast, you can create something. From there, you can come up with other ideas. Here's how I can promote you. It moves on up to wisdom support, that 20% that yields an 80% return. And then transformational opportunities. And then I added another step, because book 2 was Make Your Connections Count. Yeah. And that one I tested out in they're on Michigan Avenue, you know, the center of our wonderful
the Miracle Mile.
The Miracle Mile. I was housed in with an accounting firm. They let me keep my company I had formed. And I got to test. They had a training arm where they worked with 300 other accounting firms, and they would create newsletters for them. They're very clever, very unique accounting firm. And so I got to use them, as I said, as guinea pigs, you know, very friendly way, you know, no animals were harmed in this. And I just tested and tested and tested and worked with a variety of accountants at the base level when they were coming in right after school with their CPA exams, at the top level as partners. So I was able to create that methodology that then kept moving along for 10 years or 9 years. And then I met Jocelyn. On the board at the University of Chicago. And I had, and again, I didn't go to the University of Chicago. They made me one of the 6 outstanding women of the decade. And I thought that was really special, and loved helping them. Jocelyn, beautiful woman, challenged Chris Galvin, son of Bob Galvin, who started Motorola. Chris was looking to open up Latin America. Jocelyn was there. She was a director at that time level, and she challenged him. She got the opportunity, and I interviewed her for a book I was writing on strategic alliances with the head of the internal alliances at Accenture, John Conlon. We wrote a book called The Power of Two. That was one of my big strategies in book writing, is to partner with executives. And so that led me to interviewing Jocelyn on alliances, because what a story was that. And I asked her at the end, which is a great question to ask anyone when you reach out to a thought leader, somebody who has expertise, somebody who's an influencer, what's one thing in your career you haven't done you'd like to do? And you know what she said?
I'm so captivated by the story. Like
she said, I want to write a book. So I thought, well, here I was with all accountants, and their focus was on small business. So here I was, I had written this book on really how to start a business in Chicago, the Chicago Entrepreneur Source Book. And Crane's here, Crane Chicago Business, made it a top 10 book. People would call this advocate for business, and they'd want to know, what should I do to start a business? And Molly Cole is her name. She referred people to the book. So again, that got me into the accounting firm, and then the accounting firm got me into the law firms and the banks, and I became the longest trainer at American National, First Chicago, on up through Bank One, buying the group, and eventually Chase buying Bank One, just like a full circle thing. And I would do interactive networking events, testing out all my methodologies. I did the University of Chicago alumni, Loyola, DePaul, Northwestern, Motorola. With Jocelyn, what I found is, why not talk about corporate networking? Think about that. You know, very few people, and there isn't even a book on corporate networking.
You're right.
I mean, it's kind of crazy, but this book is, and I kept going with it. I mean, the methodology is still very, very strong. Most people say it was like, hey, you were 10 years, whatever, ahead of your time. But with that, we brought the book out. We challenged each other to create a name. So Networlding became the name, and Jocelyn became the first chief marketing officer of Motorola. And, you know, if anybody can see it, there's how we looked back then. Isn't that funny? So that was so exciting for me to get to work with Jocelyn on the book. Basically, she said, look, you already got the methodology. I'm going to write the beginning and the end, and then stories about using it in corporations. With that, Jocelyn gets promoted, like most of my authors do when they write a book. And so again, that was book 7. And what happened then was Jocelyn brought me in as a marketing expert to help Motorola, since she was their first chief marketing officer, analyze best practices of other companies that had best practices that were successful for marketing.
Yes.
And that account was a $500,000 account. So talk about an exchange. She becomes the first chief marketing officer, and I get my first $500,000 opportunity to go into a company. And I used Amazon, Procter & Gamble, and 3 other, mid-sized companies. But that was fun. And then from there, Jocelyn moved to become the chief marketing officer of Office Depot. And we did events for about 2 years to 3 years. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3, but at least 2, with 1,000 women in the room every year. So we had Katie Couric, we had Jerry Laybourne from Oxygen, Hillary Clinton, a Secretary of Labor at that time. And I broke everyone up into groups of 10, which is the social science,
Yeah.
you know, just like Gladwell says in the tipping point. But it was so much fun because everybody got connected. And I've not shared this a lot in interviews, but through the years, I got to get, I did all kinds of strange things or fun things. In the year 2000 and I want to say 4, maybe, I was able to get work 2.5 days a week with a company called participate.com. So I moved away from the accounting firm and I kept my company all along, but kept trying different things because I like to learn. At Participate, they had me writing white papers on social networking. And what I found was there's a church in Chicago, outside of Chicago, called Willow Creek. And they had at that time about 8,000 people and 80,000 people and 8,000 small groups of 10. I found a church in the Southwest that had 200,000 people and 20,000 small groups of 10. And a church in Seoul, Korea that had 1 million people and 100,000 small groups of 10.
Hey, can I interject and just ask
Sure.
something? Because I'm just trying to remember the name of Dunbar's number.
That was more, I'm trying to think if it was 150, I want to
Well,
say.
he said that he broke, I believe he broke it down into 3 groups. He says 10 would be the deep relationships.
Yes.
And then that would be your first tier. And I'm going to bridge over where you came into my thinking, why I reached out to you. So there's the 10.
Yeah.
And then there's 150. And that 150 is if I bumped into you on the street, I'd feel comfortable and say, let's grab a coffee. And there could then be our loose affiliations, the tertiary, where you have you could have 10,000, 1 million people now because of the internet. I don't know. And when I went to that group, the first group, and I really thought to myself that they don't have my contacts, we're not moving in the same direction. Yes, I might get a 1 referral, but there's going to be really nothing. And then I also started thinking, well, in the area they would refer me to, they weren't thought of as a thought leader or an expert or the person that they would rely on. And I was really frustrated. And you mentioned the 10, and that's why I want to focus on it. Because here I am, I understood what Gladwell was saying, and I understood what Emmanuel was saying. The question I had is well, how do I meet someone, and what are the questions I should be asking myself so I could go and find someone who could fit my 10 and my 150 and to not waste time. And there's a term that someone taught me years ago. It's called a China egg. And what that is it's a China egg, right? It's worth something. And I sit on it hoping that it's going to crack, but it's a China egg. It's nothing's ever going to come out of it because it's not an egg. Yeah. So I read your book and the part that, and I'm trying to put this together because I don't know how to focus my mind. I'm smart enough or stupid enough to say go to experts. And I would recommend to anyone that if you don't feel that you have the right people around, the first place to go is to read. And you isolate. To me, it's like you and I are sitting here, and I'm very conscious that there could be hundreds of thousands of people in this conversation because we've been influenced by hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people that we're not even aware of. And the point is to become conscious. So getting back to those 3 questions. So I'm searching, I'm saying, this is all great. I love describing how a car is, but no one's actually telling me how they turn on the ignition. Yeah. And I'm reading your book, and there's 3 questions that you share, which changed my entire life. And it's the reason, you and I are talking, because I apply it. And the first one is, do we share the same values? Right. That's step because that was something I did. I didn't have the word to even look at it. And that means you got to spend a lot of time on yourself and go back to Socrates, know thyself, because you need to do a SWOT test where you identify what you're good at, what your unique value is, your talent, and then you have to also identify who you can best serve and who can best serve you.
Yes.
And that's the work. That's probably the toughest work. The second one, can we work together? Now, in the old world, before now, it would be difficult because like we would have to fax things back and forth and have phone calls. It wouldn't be like it is now. But can we work together? Because we might share the same values, but you know, my working habits might bother you.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, is there opportunity? And what you pointed out that stuck to me, that if we share the same values, we can work together, we'll find the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Right.
However, getting back to that 10 group,
Mm-hmm.
if you got people put in your group, like are in your group, and you haven't asked those questions, you could be like wasting the most precious asset, and that's your life
Time,
energy.
yeah.
Because
Mm-hmm.
that's gone. Like that's it. That's all you
Yeah.
have. It's your experiences at the end of the day and the people you
That's
touch.
right. Yeah.
And to me, that was like, wow, you created a primer for me to actually say, how do I find the real people in my life? Because things are fleeting. Like things are fleeting. It's our relationships and our experiences. And to me, it was much more encompassing, and that's where I want to go back, because it's something you've addressed in your entire career. It's not about like I'm going and I'm having a transaction.
Right.
Ultimately, a mature person wants that wisdom exchange where
Right.
it just happens naturally, where I do something for you because that's just what I do, because that's our relationship. And now I feel when the water rises, everybody's ship rises. Well, thank you. That's all I can say, because you answered something that it was unconscious, but I hadn't put those questions so I could have that prism
Mm-hmm.
to look at the world.
Right. And now with the advent of social media, because I was a networking coach on 6-figure jobs for 10 years. So I helped 3,000 individuals learn LinkedIn, which then I got to impart Networlding, and they were in transition. So they were laser beam focused on getting a job. So for those people who want to get the next piece of business or get that great job, what I did was show them the tool called LinkedIn, which I call the multi-billion-dollar tool, which it is. And I also got to go and present to the company when they only had 80 people.
Oh, wow.
They had me come out and talk to them. And that was my Wizard of Oz moment. I felt like I had landed in Oz, and I just absolutely loved it. But the new things that have come about, one thing I'll say is, to add to what you learned, is that the introduction is the new referral, because we have social proof online right now. Not right now, but now and going forward. LinkedIn is the boardroom, Facebook is the barbecue, Twitter's water cooler, Instagram is the art gallery, and TikTok is the performance stage.
Oh, wow. No, I haven't.
So that's very helpful for people to go, what should I do? And I think it's best to focus on one at a time. The thing at the University of Chicago, for whatever reason, all these very bright people loved, was I had a fulcrum and a lever. And I like to look at the lever, as Archimedes, the mathematician, once said, give me a lever long enough and I'll leverage the world. I like to look at that lever like a pull stick that's a pull stick that folds up. So each section of it, when you bring it out, that's the lever for you. And you leverage from your strengths. So to your point, slowing down to speed up, which is a paradox. And Einstein once said, true genius is holding two seemingly diametrically ideas in your mind at once. So it was fun to share all these counterintuitive, paradoxical points about building networks, like you said. And when you talked, so one of the points you said was know thyself. One of the things I found, because I partnered with the Chicagoland Chamber, which is another cool tip, right down the street again, could take you down there, and ask them, what day of the week are you the least busy that I could have training sessions here? I want to do boot camps. They said, oh, it's on Thursday mornings. So I would offer the opportunity for people, they would either go online, buy the book and pay $50 for a one-day boot camp, or they paid $350 and I'd give them a book. And what was fascinating, as you might think, that in Chicago at that time, Amazon was showing books that did well in cities, and there are over 11,000 categories on Amazon, also in cities, different types of books. Networlding was number 10 over all categories for an entire year. Now, I could have traveled around the world and done other things. And now with Zoom, you know, if it was now, everybody said to me, oh, Networlding's like 10 years, 20 years ahead of its time. I did things that I've not seen since. And like bringing 22 chambers together. And the connection, the deep connection, I would create all these exercises for people. And one of them, another one that you're talking about, you know, when you're referencing, like, how do I find these people? So the fascinating thing is you can find out more about yourself. And I would challenge you to do this and then tell me what you find.
Yes.
Go ask your family members and or friends, what are your top 3 values that they see? Because a lot of people,
my values or their
value,
values. So how what they
values.
perceive I value. Okay.
Right. And it will absolutely surprise you what they say. And you're looking for patterns, and you're going to start really understanding what your strengths, your values are.
This is what I've learned professionally, and I've had this happen several times. There's things that I think I am, and then there's things that the world perceives me as. And the first time that I woke up to that is I was a stockbroker, but I became a CFP, certified financial planner, back in the early 1990s. And I went to a client, and she just went to someone who was not designated, who was a financial advisor. And I said, but I'm certified. I'm a certified financial planner. And she turned to me and she said, I don't see you that way. And it was like, you don't see me that way? I'm thinking, and at the same time, I said, but I had a choice at that point. I could let her box me in, or I could step back and deal with people who did see me the way I wanted to see myself. And that's where becoming that, I think, sharing that story right now, that was one of those moments that you step back in life. I'm sharing that story because you've triggered that memory that had me search out how to build my network instead of having my network be there. That can be toxic. Because
you're only as strong as your weakest link. Correct. That's by the way, if you've, and I can't imagine you haven't read this book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior.
Yes.
The author of that book, though, said the one axiom that always holds true is you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so that powerful awareness of finding those people, finding your power of 10. But again, to the point, there's nothing like 1-to-1 first, and then 1-to-10, and then 1-to-many. And that connection, you know, that you have with that group of people that are your circle of support makes all the difference. This whole understanding too of reciprocity, like Robert Cialdini, who talks about the law of reciprocity, that's there also. But no matter what, we are humans. We are so unique and always, to me, always evolving. Hopefully some people devolve, but there are so many opportunities in the world now to leverage networks or networlds. And I like to call them networlds because back to the story about Fortune Brands and Sally Helgeson, the adjunct professor at Harvard, who's a best-selling author, when I talked about the 7 levels of support, what I call the Great Exchange, she said that's the holy grail for building relationships. But the thing that really made my day that day, usually when I would give talks or I was on a panel, we would have a social hour after. And in this case, we were focused on the top women at Fortune Brands. And there were 2 younger women who came running up to me while I was talking to someone after the session. And they were saying, because I had said during the session, would you rather have a conversation where you say, yeah, let's create an opportunity this year? By the way, that's step 6 of networlding, co-creating. And not everybody does it, but that's what I'm always after, is the partnering. And I said, would you rather have that, oh yeah, let's do something, versus the monumental conversation of, let's create a transformational opportunity this year? The energy is so much higher. It's palpable. And so afterwards, there was a young Black girl and a young white girl, I should say white woman, Black woman. They came running through the room shouting, we're going to create a transformational opportunity this year here. What company wouldn't want that? You know?
I agree. You mentioned that you worked with accounting firms. The people who know that I had a column for the largest CPA publication in Canada for 17 years. And I was a spoiled kid. What I mean is I fell into that job and I didn't know the significance. And then when I did understand the significance, my column was literally worth $28,000. And I didn't know it at first. And I came to that understanding because they had paid subscriptions, and it went to about 70% of all the CPAs in Canada. And they charged about 14 grand for a page, and I got a page for free. So I divided how many issues, how many pages, to figure out what my page was worth. And I realized that was my trade. So what I ended up doing, and you talk about reciprocity, and this is something a lot of people don't understand. I'm going to do something anyway, like you're going to breathe anyway. Mm-hmm. So I find you, Melissa, and I give you something, and I have to give you something of value, something that you perceive. So I knew that I had my column and many of the tax lawyers and the accountants who I wanted as not clients, as referrals. I wanted to give them something. And when I became conscious of what my value proposition was, and this is major, like I wasn't conscious of it until I sat down and I figured it out. I would go to them and I would write beautiful brochures. They were giving me their knowledge. Then sometimes these people charge $1,200 an hour, and they were giving it for free. And half the time I'd get them to write out the points for me, and then I turned it into a story. And that's where I became a storyteller. Instead of giving you the facts, I would, talk about how we met in a coffee shop or something like that. I would bring I would make it more full. And then I'd write them a piece. That was my trade. And the reason I share that, because if there was no reciprocity after that article, I had another column. It wasn't going to put me at it. It's not like I bought tickets for you to go to the opera and I don't have any money and I just went bankrupt. It's like, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yes.
And it comes down to the trading, to go and test out what type of person, and this is a value thing. And I learned years ago 2 terms that I look at. And one is, and this is something that you addressed and I addressed in my book, an infinite game player compared to a finite game player. Exactly. And the difference is, if we played volleyball and someone happens to be a finite game player, they would spike it and want a point. If they're an infinite game player, we would volley, and that would be more fun. And we want more people to volley.
Yeah, that's great. I love that analogy.
I want to share something else, because this is something that it's really stuck in my mind, because, you know, I'm writing my new book, and it's called The Dot Collectors, meaning I can't connect dots unless I first collected them, and I can't expand my model without having individuals like you to share what you've seen in this life to build up.
Yes.
As a gentleman, I remember he did this to me twice over a 5-year period. His name was Derek Hill. I want to give him kudos. And he ran in Canada the largest practice management company for dentists. So we're sitting down, and you know how he started the conversation? He literally laid it out. He said, Peter, there's 3 types of people in business. And I'm a little kid. I want his business. I want him to, like, you know, rub my head and make me successful and open up his kimono, and I'd be successful. 1, it's all about win, lose. They can't let you get a yard
down. Yes.
Right. And then the second group is when I don't care what happens to you. If you win, great. If you lose, I don't care. It's all about me. And the last type is win-win. Those infinite game players that understand that Melissa wins today, but because she happens to be in my core group and you're an infinite game player, we all win, because we keep on bringing people in. And just to share something, if you really like someone, you're going to want to invite them. You're going to want to have other people meet them, right? You see, this is such a great person. Come and meet them. And here's the other thing, which I just want to share. We sat down about a few years later. He gave me the same speech, and I said, that's brilliant. He incorporated it, because he asked that question so many times he was able to read the other person. He was able to, it was habitual. And that's where your questions and making it part of who you are, so you don't have to think about it, are so powerful, because your most important asset is time. And what people don't understand, it's not about money, it's about the quality of your experiences. And that happens to be with the people you surround yourself with, and to be able to apply what you've learned and experienced and shared to people, so they're getting a better life experience. I don't think it's business. It's because, in essence, if it becomes who you are.
No, I love that. I love that.
It's who you are. So I want to move on to your book publishing. Because you learned all this stuff through networking. Because I took from you, Melissa, because there were 2 people, both are in Chicago. One's my brother-in-law. He's had about 13 books, and he never wrote his own books. He wrote them, but he was the editor. He brought in other people, the experts.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I did with my textbooks. And I did that with my articles. Like, I became the expert by partnering with experts. I was managing putting it together, or I had my column. I knew what my unique value proposition was.
Yes.
And just before I move into that, I just want to add something to the conversation, and I've written about it, is you have a unique value proposition. You're valued. There's certain things I'm good at, and there's certain things I'm not good at. I'm good at networking and connecting. And I also am very good at connecting people with the right people. I'm not very good, not that I can't do it, to actually do the implementation. There's certain people who are really good. Years ago, I met this woman when I was selling a product, and she was the executive assistant to the president of a big telecom company. And I have to fill out these forms. And she said, no, let me do it. I love filling out forms. And I'm sitting, there's someone who likes doing something, because who wants to fill out forms, right? But this woman, she got her Zen moments from doing the form. So I became aware of that. But so you have to know what your unique value proposition is, and you got to be brutally honest. So I'm never going to have 1,000 people work for me. It's just not in my cards. I'm an advisor. I'm a bumblebee. I go to different places. I like observing.
And Melissa means honeybee. So I'm a bumblebee too.
Right. And bumblebees know bumblebees.
That's right.
So you know your unique value proposition. So I took a long time to understand this for myself. Is some people have the ability to immediately see your value proposition. Other people might need time. And the vast majority of people will never see your value proposition. Things don't have to be so difficult. That's the point. Everyone goes and says, it's got to be difficult. Oh, I got to slug it out and eventually I'll get it. No, if I want to catch salmon, I'm not going to go to the Chicago River. I'm just not going to find that much. I'm going to go to when they're spawning to the mouth of the salmon Fraser. For those of you who don't know, that's where all the salmon go to spawn in the Pacific. Yes. I want to go there. And this is where you were saying slow down to speed up. Is that the terminology?
Yes.
You had all these wonderful experiences of collaborating, and you brought that experience and you created a publishing company.
Yes, Jocelyn, as one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. I mean, she's, just incredible. We had our very important talk riding home one day after one of our meetings at the University of Chicago. And she asked me, Melissa, what are you going to do now? Where are you going with all this? And what is it that you really want to do? And she said, I love all your books, and she was so practical. I love the way she talked too. She said, you got to pick one, because you have books on leadership and books on this and books on that. You've got to pick one and really build it. And I thought, well, I think it would be most advantageous, and the thing that matters the most, I'm going to stick with Networlding. So the first 10 years was focused on entrepreneurship with books. Second 10 years was focused on corporations, because of Jocelyn, I met Billy Dexter out of Motorola too, who's referred over $3 million worth of business to me over the years with books, with publishing. Larry Moll, who became the head of leadership for American Express, who was at Motorola. People from Office Depot that I partnered with once Jocelyn went to Office Depot. And it just kept evolving. So the next 10 years was corporate with Accenture, American Express, Office Depot, you name it, AT&T. I got to be a spokesperson for a year. And believe it or not, their question to me was, how do we network in communities to grow brand loyalty? And I found that Rotary One was here in Chicago and Rotary International's in Evanston. And I thought, oh, I'm going to go to Rotaries. I was a member of the Rotary Club in Elk Grove Village. And I thought, that's perfect, because those are the centerpieces, the central people in communities, the chief of police, the chief of the fire department. It was wonderful. And as usual, I partnered with somebody there. I brought in, I said, well, why don't I work with one of the marketing people? And she looked like Halle Berry. And I'm like, let's do it together. So we got cards that I gave away that said Networlding and AT&T. I got hats and all kinds of wonderful things to give away. I looked through their website, saw a give back, because I'm all about giving back. And I saw that they had something called Learning Points, where anyone who allocated their long distance dollars toward these learning points could be gifting schools needed equipment and training for kids. It was a no-brainer, but they had at that time, websites had like 100 pages. Companies just went crazy with them. But I found that page and I'm like, that's what we should use. So I still have my nice letter where they said this was like 100% more effective than our traditional push transactional marketing. And I went, okay. So it's this idea of turning these opportunities into bigger transformational opportunities. So I end up getting married again. My husband and I are second marriages. And he said, if you want to reinvent yourself, you can. And so I said, okay, I'm going to start a publishing company. And so now I'm in 11th year and have helped 160 authors who are thought leaders write, publish, and launch and market their books.
That's awesome. So you partnered and each of them have experiences. And what is the process of someone starting to work with you, and what's the end product?
When people start with me, it's really better to not have a book written, because the other background I have is in writing. And I used to teach writing on the college level, composition and creative writing. And I would have my students sit beside me, and they'd have their what they were writing. And I'd actually work with them on it, helped work their brain to figure out, how do we tell these stories, but always honoring them as the thought leader they are. And so the usual piece is starting point, and my proposals are all, here's step one, here's step two, and then working with the authors on deciding, do they want the whole process or a piece of it? And 9 times out of 10, I help about, on average, 15 authors a year. And I am a boutique firm. I'm focused, and Networlding is too, focused on quality. Quality begets quantity. So we do the research, and we look at all the other books. I look at the 1 and 2 and even 3-star reviews first, because I want to understand what people don't like. I'm always looking for patterns, what people start to say is okay, and getting to the middle point, and then you get to the 5 stars, and seeing what they do like. That's what you always want to put in your book, and you want to look for patterns across.
That's such a wonderful,
Yeah.
I don't want to just pass,
Yeah.
because that's
No,
a
go
piece
ahead.
of gold.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found really, really powerful is I love reading reviews, especially long reviews.
Yes.
Like it's because it's a known fact in politics that one phone call is 50,000 people, and someone who would take the time out to write it is good or bad. It's powerful, and just the way that you process it. And I guess what I'm saying, Melissa, can you do that again? Because I'm a writer, and this is incredible. This is like you've given a primer to how to look at what you should do.
Yeah, I love what I'm doing. I feel like Mr. Holland's opus, because I know that my authors have richness in them,
Right.
and I'm patient in pulling it out. And I've discovered, I use what's called the scribe method. I've discovered that this wisdom shouldn't be written by a ghostwriter. The first thing should be interviewing the author when you're getting out their ideas. But through the years, and it was my son who noticed it, he kept saying, Mom, because I started doing writers' workshops, and for a day, just like the boot camps for Networlding.
Right.
And I said, okay, so what I'm seeing is that people have these beautiful ideas and they don't realize it. Again, that's the whole thing about why coaches are so wonderful.
Yeah.
And one of my lines is, if you write the word understanding, and you could do it with a permanent marker. I'm like looking for, here's a permanent marker. If I did it on my hand, you can hold out your hand though, and you think you see the understanding of yourself, but you actually, it's way up here and it's inside your head. And coaches can see behind you. They can get the perspective for you. So I am very patient, and I found 1-hour intervals over about 4 months is where I'm usually at with the book. Some of the books have gone for 2 years. I've done all kinds of interesting things. Sometimes people want to write. They seem to always come back to the interviewing. And so what I've done is I've sensitized, or my ears are sensitized, my brain sensitized to what they're saying. So that's where the magic happens with people when I'm writing. I'm so sensitive to their words. And I feel like maybe it's like a savant moment, you know, in a way. It's this, something happens in my head and then in my heart, and it just like bursts when I hear something beautiful. Your number one strength is you are a master storyteller.
Thank you.
And your book is one of the best I've ever read. I love it. Of course, it's set in Chicago, and I'm going, how does he know so much?
You're very in tune to what resonates, and one of the things,
reader, I am your proverbial reader, your intended reader, your extended reader, and I'm listening with my ears and my head and my heart, and I'm feeling, you know, there's certainly a kinesthetic, like amplified moment.
Yes.
And I just know these are the words people are yearning to read, to stand up and stand out, do the right thing. There's so much power in it, and gives me chills.
You've been wondering, Melissa, thank you.
Nuggets. Oh my gosh. That's
well, thank you. And I'd like to do this again in a few months.
Let's do it.